going to take us on a journey back in time. You remember, some of you may remember You Were There TV shows that, you like radio and TV announcer that like you're reporting the news. Well, this individual is going to take us back in time before what we think of Silicon Valley was Silicon Valley, before Steve Jobs, Wozniaks, and all the other individuals we think of when we think of Silicon Valley. Back many, many years. Our speaker, Claude Dubreuil, has been, for 4 decades, has been a mechanical contractor and support for the high-tech industry. An industry that has gone from vacuum tubes to microprocessors and beyond, things that power your cell phone here, these devices, before even these things were a dream. Claude will walk us through the history of the technology. I'm sure you'll hear some things, very surprising things, that now powers our technology. Please help me welcome Claude Dubreuil. Who was the father of Silicon Valley? Who was the father of Silicon Valley? Claude Dubreuil.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and honored guests. First thing I'm going to have 3 questions I'm going to ask you first. Who knows how to pronounce Silicon Valley? It's Silicon Valley, not Silicon, not silicone, not silicon. It's silicon. It's an element on the periodic table. Right. The next thing is, does anybody know what mechanical contracting is? I didn't think so. So I want to introduce myself in that first. I'm kind of a pedestrian guy in Silicon Valley. If I was a billionaire, I wouldn't be here. Right? The reality is, I worked in the plumbing, sheet metal, HVAC industry, but supporting the really high-end demand of Silicon Valley. I had a great job. It took care of my family, and I was able to raise my family in Silicon Valley. At the same time, I really realized that I didn't belong to that club. See, as I was climbing the corporate ladder, a lot of those guys were taking the elevator. Right? And the third thing I want to ask you is, do you know who this person is? Yeah. Because I did this rendition in front of the people that I work with, and they did not identify this person as being Cosby.
I know.
Oh, like yours.
I said, well, just imagine this. It's really Bruno Mars of the 40s. Right? So the premise that I'm going to hold before you is that this man actually may have been one of the fathers of Silicon Valley.
Really?
As Lee Iacocca once said, after he was asked by one of the reporters, you claim to be the father of the Mustang, but then so do all these other people. He goes, yeah, I hate to see the mother. And the reality is that there are a lot of beginnings in Silicon Valley, and I think what I'm going to try to do is maybe cover maybe one of those avenues, how the valley became incredibly, incredibly famous throughout the world and changed their lives forever. Back in 1900, Santa Clara was called the Valley of Heart's Delights. Now, isn't that much more pleasant than something that's called Silicon Valley? Valley of Heart's Delights. This is a picture taken, and that would be the Bay Shore Highway, and you can imagine that would be Mountain View with all the beautiful fields. And I met a lot of those people when I worked there, because I started working there in 1976. And a lot of those were pear farmers and peach farmers who had beautiful orchards. And every day they would wake up to the smell of these blossoms all the way across the valley. It was truly an incredible place. In 1971, somebody published an article, and it was in Electronics Weekly, and they called it Silicon Valley. And it's just like a stamp, it stuck like glue, and we've been stuck with that name forever. And the reality is that Silicon Valley almost eclipsed in the 80s, yet we still call it Silicon Valley. But I want to take you back and show you why this fertile valley turned into what it is today, and all the potential people that might have been the fathers along the way. Okay. This is a radio tube. Now many of you might know what a radio tube is, but some of you won't. So I'm going to pass this little thing around, just so you can touch
They were
it.
even smaller than that for a while.
There. Okay. That's a radio tube. Now, what's important about this radio tube is in 1920, the federal government undertook to overtake all the properties of Marconi Radio. Marconi was the inventor of the telegraph, and they feared that the government might be held at bay if a foreign ownership of all of its telegraph companies and capability might be taken over by a foreign government. So the Navy got together with got together and acquired all the radio stations and all the assets that were at that time available of the Marconi company, including buying a lot of the small stations that were broadcasting. And they renamed that company RCA. The problem with that issue is that all that power, which was on the East Coast, was all focused within that environment. And there were people on the West Coast who could not acquire these tubes unless they were, paid the high price demanded by the RCA company. Right there, that's Charles Lytton. He's quite famous for, this is kind of interesting. That is a glass lathe. He's actually making a vacuum tube. And in the Bay Area at the time, there were 10 times more ham radio operators. Now this is a funny joke. I said that to a bunch of 20-year-olds. They go, what are you doing with pigs? Because they didn't understand that ham was amateur radio. That was a joke, right? So these guys were ham radio operators, and because they couldn't really acquire these tubes for any valuable price, they started making their own. The East Coast companies, who were these big companies, started suing Lytton for making these tubes. So he stepped out and started breaking all their patents. And along with this other guy, Bill Eitel, and they started a company called IMAC. Now, when I moved to the Bay Area in the 60s, I'd heard of that name, but I really didn't have any context. And the funny thing is, they were talking, it was a high tech, and I go, IMAC, I've never heard of it. Who's ever heard of it? Well, IMAC turned out they broke 200 of the patents that were held by RCA, and by 1940s, they were the #1 manufacturer of tubes in the country. Not only that, they were the best functioning tubes, so that the military during the Second World War were only using IMAC tubes for all their radars and their equipment. Now this guy's probably father number 2. Fred Terman was a professor at Stanford University. And along with Bill Eitel and Lytton, they had this little club where they got together and they loaned each other equipment. And, oh, you need a lathe? I'll loan you a lathe. I'm not making any money. Can you sell some chickens? Because that's really what it was. It was like a little country town where people just kind of worked around. And Fred Terman, the head of the department, helped them with equipment, technology, and loaned them in intellect. And they helped a couple other people, like Russell and Sig Varian, who invented the Klystron tube, the basis which actually won the war for the United States, the Second World War. They invented a device that powered all the radar equipment, that detected all the enemy subs, and this was invented in 1937 with the help of Fred Terman. I could tell you a whole story just about these guys, but I know I'll run out of time. A couple other guys that Fred used to help out was David Packard, Bill Hewlett. Oh yeah, Hewlett Packard, little company. In Palo Alto. They worked out of their garage. They used to just hang out and share ideas. The war comes along, and everybody, including Fred, gets shipped over to the East Coast, working with MIT to develop all the technology it needs to fight the war. Most of it has to do with radar. Obviously, the Varian brothers are really well equipped to understand that. So is Fred, who's got this group. And at the end of the war, they come back to the Bay Area. But the war's over. Nobody's working on radar anymore. It's not really a demand for Klystron tubes. This guy, his name's Jack Mullins. He's from San Francisco. He works in a telephone office, and during the war, he gets assigned to the Signal Corps. He works in England, and at the end of the war, it gets moved over to Paris. You might notice his brass. I was an enlisted man. I didn't have that fancy stuff up there. But he works in Paris, and his job is to go out and look at all the German electronics that was left behind. And he's an audiophile. He loves records. He was always involved with sound and music and records. He called them shellac records. I'm not even old enough to understand a shellac record, but maybe you might understand it. He's in Paris, and he is told to go take a look in Frankfurt. There's a tower there that apparently the 9th Air Force, as they were flying over, said that there was a lot of interference with their engine. Their engines actually started to sputter. So he goes over to Frankfurt. They found this hill, big wooden tower, climb all the way up into it, nothing there. All the equipment's been stripped out. What's really amazing, he finds in the basement engines that are diesel generators that are bigger than this room. Obviously, there must have been something there, but he runs into this British officer who's there for the same reason, and they start talking, yik-yakking about sound. He goes, well, have you ever heard the tape recorders that the Germans were using? He goes, yeah, we picked up a whole bunch of this. Well, what do you think about the quality? He goes, Jack says, it's garbage. It's nothing. I'll take a 78 record anytime. It's way better fidelity, has a real good highs and lows. No, I think you ought to go to Frankfurt. Check this out. So he's driving down the hill, gets to the bottom of the hill, he has a right turn to go to Paris, he has a left turn to go to Frankfurt. Let's go to Frankfurt. Goes to Frankfurt, runs in, radio stations operated by the Americans, walks into the station saying, hey, I heard you got some tape recording devices here that I'd like to be able to hear. Yeah. Says, France. And here, this German person puts this tape on his machine and turns on, and he had never heard anything like it. He was absolutely blown away, and he was an expert audiophile. He thought, wow, this is really cool. What does he do? Gets his camera out, grabs the book, click, click, takes all the pictures of every schematic they had. It was called a magnetophone, and the Germans had been using it. Had incredible sound. So, spoils of war, he decides he's going to maybe grab a couple of these machines and bring them back to Paris. And he brings them back to Paris, takes them all apart, puts them in 18 different little boxes, ships them all back to San Francisco. You know, he can't wait to get there because I know I can rebuild this. Gets back to San Francisco, knocks on the door. Hi, Mom, how you doing? You're bald. Yeah, but where are my boxes? We got the boxes. They're there. Opens up the boxes, starts to put together all the electronics, put it all together. It's got the German transport, really good, but he actually can improve on the electronics. He tunes in the bias so that he can get a full range, way up to those, it's beyond my technical, I think it's 15,000 gigahertz. Try to get that amplitude way up there. He takes it on the road. Now, in St. Carlos, there's a guy, his name is Alexander Pornikov. He's got a little company, doesn't really know what to do. It's the end of the war. He's been building radar motors for the last 5 years, and now he's trying to figure out, how am I going to keep my 6-man shop working? He's kind of interested in working on Jack's little idea. But Jack goes, I'm not going to go back to work for the telephone company. I'm just going to take this on the road, see if the movie company wants to use it. Goes down to Southern California with one of his buddies to show off this new technology, which is really quite amazing. Turns out the movie industry is not interested in it because all their equipment is leased. And if they were to introduce this technology into the movies, the leasing company would take all the equipment out. So then it's really a financing issue. One of the guys that happens to be there is one of the agents that works for this guy. Now you got to understand, this guy's a big star. It's 1940. And he's got a contract. Philco's paying the bill. ABC wants him on the air. But every one of his his shows are recorded on shellac. And they take that shellac record, they record it over and over and over again. By the time they put it on the air, it sounds like And that doesn't work. This guy's a big star. Listens to this, I want it. What's it gonna take? Well, how many machines you got? Just these two. The two that I shipped back from, the two transports that I shipped back. Can you get them made? Yeah. Here's $100,000. Go get them built. $100,000, that's $1 million today, maybe more. That's the first cabinet that was built. Fancy electronics, really well. Black shellac cabinet, gorgeous. A piece of furniture. And that started this company. If you were able to see the rest of the video over here, it says Ampex. Bing Crosby became one of the distributors of Ampex for the Western United States, and that also launched Ampex into the technology of recording sound, but also precision instrument recording, and eventually video recording. There's Alexander Kontov with one of the first video recording machines. Their technology was pretty much a staple across all radio and television for many, many, many years. One of his engineers you might have heard of, Ray Dolby. Sound familiar? Dolby Theater, yeah. And there's quite a few other people that worked in that environment. So one could argue a little bit that Bing might have launched a lot of the tech that started in Silicon Valley. There's more. 1952, IBM hears that there's a lot of tech going on on the West Coast. So they send 8 people out in San Jose, and they go, set up a little shop, keep your ear to the ground what's going on. They tell back in New York, they go, hey, there's a lot of expertise here on magnetic recording. So in '55, they decide they're going to put a full crew, and they're working on this project right here. It's called a RAMAC, Random Access Memory Accounting Computer. Now you got to understand, what they're trying to do is create a computer that could give you back the information very quickly. Not like, the tape where you have to go to the beginning, and tape you have to go back to the end, and the tape you have to go back to the beginning again, very slow. What they decided to do is use it just like a record player. When you take a record, you want to get to the beginning, you just move the arm. You want to get to the end, move the arm again. Their idea was that by stacking a series of disks, they could actually create this random access memory. And this, by the way, was the first RAMAC disk array. You won't believe this. 5 megabytes of storage. Whoa! 5 megabytes of storage. That's so little, nobody even understands regs anymore. Very instrumental. So what happened, that was like 55, and during the 60s, another thing happened. This is the formation of Memorex Corporation. If you actually look at, this is actually their document that they filed to file their corporation. And if you read all the way through it, basically 4 of the top executives that worked at, come on, Ampex, right, decided to form their own company. They were interested in precision recording equipment. Now, Ampex was really dealing with audio. They were doing some instrumentation work, but there was a huge market for military and precision recording, and the value of that product was way higher than what Ampex was getting out of that market. So they decided they wanted to create the medium for that high-end recording environment. 4 of the top guys broke off of Ampex, started a company called Memorex. Now, some of you later on might remember Ella Fitzgerald. Is it live or is it Memorex? And now, down here is San Jose. Down here is IBM. That's that RAMAC plant. Up here is where they settled in Santa Clara, right, Scott Road. And up here is where Ampex was. So this turns into Silicon Valley. 1961, that's the forming of Memorex. Again, coming into the chromium dioxide. Now here's the thing. It's called Silicon Valley, and I haven't even talked about silicon yet. Back in the 40s, at the end of the World War, everybody's trying to figure out how to solve problems where that little tube is, right here. The biggest one is the telephone company. The telephone company is trying to amplify a circuit so they can go all the way across the country. The only way they can do that is that they have stepper stations that have vacuum tubes to step up the signal from station to station to station until you can get that broadcast. These things burn out. They burn out a lot. So Bell Labs in New Jersey decides they want to put all their strength to developing a way to amplify a circuit and do it in a miniaturized fashion that's more reliable than the tube. The three people here are John Bardeen, William Shockley, and Walter Batten. Now, the reason this guy's kind of looking at this guy is because he knows this guy didn't invent it. These two invented it. He wasn't even there. But he hogs the credit. Why? Because he's, yeah, he is that. And so he wants to be named on the patent. And as a consequence of that whole adventure, he's working at Bell Labs, and everybody hates his guts. Because they know that even though he led the lab, he didn't do the work, and nobody will trust him because they know he hogged the credit. So,
What was his name?
William Shockley.
Okay.
William Shockley is famous for a lot of bad other things, but you should look him up. It's great, great stories. So, and at the same time, he's like not being too faithful to his wife, and there's all these other issues. Everybody hates his guts. Goes to work for the federal government for a while, but then things are dicey. Now, he was born in Palo Alto, and so he's trying to figure out how he can get on the West Coast because he's a rock climber. Believe it or not, he's a rock climber. And he loves Northern California because you can go to the mountains, go rock climbing. He's got a new girlfriend and she likes to rock climb. So, he gets an offer to open up a company for Beckman Enterprises who tells him, well, you can move down in Southern California. He goes, no, I want Northern California, better mountains. My mom lives there. She lives in Palo Alto. She's a graduate of Palo Alto, so I want to move up there. He ends up moving to Palo Alto. He's frequently called the next father of Silicon Valley. But so what happens, he moves to Palo Alto, starts a semiconductor company because he knows all about these nifty devices. They're called, transistors. Fancy device. That's the first one. Really fancy, isn't it? But what happens is this transistor device, I got to move this over because you're going to love it. I had one of these. It was so cool. You could open it up and count the transistors. You could actually count them. 1, 2, 3. And if you had a 6-transistor radio, you could listen to rock and roll. And actually, one would say that maybe the transistor radio created rock and roll because it allowed kids to listen to rock and roll without their parents' interference. But I diverged. He moves over to Silicon Valley. I'm sorry, which is not Silicon Valley at the time. Moves over to Palo Alto, and because nobody wants to follow him because they can't trust him farther than he can throw a rock, he can't get anybody from Bell Labs or anybody else to come to work for him. So he starts scouring all the universities and figuring out all the young PhDs are really smart, and he gets a bunch, 8 guys together, and he brings them all together to this place in Palo Alto, opens up Shockley Semiconductor. They work there 1 year. They say, this guy's a complete ass, we have to quit. And they start another company called Fairchild. Okay, now Fairchild, you nod, you understand. Fairchild's maybe the most important change in Silicon Valley altogether. And the 8 people, they're called the Traders 8. It sets 2 things in motion. Number 1, you don't have to be loyal to your boss. It's part of the deal. East Coast, you had to do that. You had to do the 20 years and 30 years and the gold watch and all that. West Coast, man, don't like the guy, get out of here, get some money, start a new company. Now during this is like 58, 59, what a fluke. You got Sputnik. Everybody's all paranoid. We got rockets coming all over the place. The government just wants to throw down some money just to buy transistors to power all their missile programs. Minuteman, right? All these missiles require really high quality transistors. And this company is just perfectly placed. Right, they start knocking out all these transistors, making loads of money. Now during that period of time, this trader say they're doing really, really well. But as the company does really, really well, because it was funded by Fairchild, side bit, Fairchild, Sherman Fairchild was the son of the former owner of IBM. He was the single largest IBM stockholder. So he was able to fund anything he ever wanted. So this was just a toy for him. But as this company started really making some money, and even though their stocks were really quite valuable, the corporate monkeys started really bear down on these people. And even though they created the very first integrated circuit, which was really amazing, the work of Jean Alny, a Swiss scientist, who developed a completely different way of creating a silicon chip, they decided to go out and move and burn, create a little company called Intel. Who doesn't know that name? Anybody? Anyone? Okay, Intel. Three most important people: Andy Grove, Robert Noyce, Gordon Moore. What's really kind of interesting is they started a company that they wanted to make sure the company was not like anything on the East Coast. They wanted to make sure that it was collegiate. They wanted to make sure it was very competitive, and everybody got a chance, and they called it almost socialism, in the way that they made sure that everybody got stock options and were able to get involved in the product and understood that the success of our product is your success. Andy Grove, that's not really his name. His name is like Andreas Graf. He's from Hungary. He escaped the Nazis. He was 20 years old when he escaped the Nazis, and then the Russians that came in and everything else. He got his PhD in Berkeley in '63. Robert Noyce was an amazing physicist. There's a phenomenal book that's under here if you ever get a chance to read
Because
it.
you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
That's Andy Grove.
That was his famous saying.
Andy Grove. You're right, just because. You always have to be paranoid, right? And then Gordon Moore, he's the one who paid attention to all the details, a detailed guy. And this is probably my personal hero, Federico Faggini. He's from University of Padua, worked for Fairchild in Italy, and then ended up in Fairchild working on silicon gate technology. And then they were in, there's a whole story about how Intel ended up creating the first coprocessor. It's quite an accident. They would have gone bankrupt had they only been in the SRAM or DRAM field like they were. But they hired this guy, and he ended up designing this little chip called a microprocessor. And I have to show you this because it's kind of interesting. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, right up here, you'll see the initials FF, Federico Faggini. He's the inventor of the original silicon chip. Now all this array, each one of these little boxes is a circuit. And it's a transistor. And that entire circuit is reduced down to a size that's smaller than an ant. And that's what microprocessors are all about. That's how significant Silicon Valley is. All these companies that are up there, Apple, Google, Oracle, Facebook, Intel, Cisco, eBay, Yahoo, Applied Materials, Tesla, all these symbols that you see up there had their roots at one time or another with Fairchild. But you know what's funny? I started working there in 1976, and by 1990, you would have called it the Iron Oxide Valley, because the Silicon Valley was no longer there. Nobody made silicon wafers anymore. Most of them were custom wafers. They did a lot of the designs. A lot of the fabs that we worked in had been moved overseas. A lot of the concerns had to do with pollution. These fabs use a lot of tetrachloroethylene and acetones and ketones and all these other kinds of materials. And a lot of these chemicals were hard to control, so most of those fabs were moved to Taiwan, Hong Kong. And at that time, by the 80s, the Japanese had already taken over the whole DRAM market, but the storage market, which started from Bing, right, was still hot and heavy. This guy, Alan Sugar, kind of important, worked at IBM. Remember that guy? They started that little Raymac project down in South. He invented the floppy. Big stuff, 80K. You could fit 3 million of these on that. 3 million, that's what it is today. 3 million of these on here. Alan Sugar started at IBM, went to Memorex, Worked there for a little while, started his company Sugar, got bought out by Xerox, started another company with one of his other buddies from Memorex. It's called Seagate. To this day, if you go to the store, you buy Sandisk, Seagate, you're going to buy one of his products. So, again, still selling Sugar there. And that was one of the first disk drives, 5¼ disk drive that was about this big. And I want to show you the difference. That is a 1" disk drive. That is a finger, my friends. That is a disk drive. That's how small disk drives have become. So, I'm sorry. I'm just about done. Wanted to show you where I work. This right there, this building is Intel. This is Applied Materials over here. Right around this corner was Memorex. And I worked right there.
What was your company?
It's
A little bit bigger than this, and about that thick is 1 terabyte disk drive.
That's right. Amazing, isn't it?
What company were you?
At the time it was called Faraday, but I've worked for Air Systems and now ACO. So now we got the 50s. I walked you through the 50s of Ampex, of SRI, of Shockley, Fairchild. We walked through the next generation of Intel and all the chips, National Semiconductor. Most of these were spin-offs of Fairchild. We walked through the next, oh, by the way, Oracle. Ellison worked for Ampex on a secret CIA project, and he read a paper that one of the people that were working at an IBM research facility on relational database had written. And IBM was not really interested in that kind of technology because they were using ISAM flat files and index files that were faster than relational database because computers weren't that fast. So why would you want to slow down your performance when you could use what you had? By using that, he started a little company called Oracle, which is the basis for all kinds of other companies. And then we went to, the next iteration was software like Intuit, Adobe. I can tell you a whole story about Adobe. Our company built the entire Cisco environment. Like every building, we were the sole contractor for Cisco. Sun, MIPS. Did you know, by the way, that Fry's started in Silicon Valley? Another little tiny bit, because I'm going to go way over time.
Well, we don't.
Chuck
we
E.
have to go.
Cheese?
We can't,
Yeah.
we don't have the time.
Yeah,
Chuck E. Cheese.
yeah, we gotta be out of here by 8:45.
All right, so see all that stuff? It all now fits in your pocket. Everything fits in your pocket. Mr. Toastmaster, thank you. Okay, that's on.